All right, we are live. Thank you everybody for joining me. My name is Justin Meyer, and with me, as usual, is Alexis Sabril, our trainer for last week, who helped fill in for me. Thank you very much, Alexis. This week, we're going to actually do a lot of coding exercises. We're going to start writing some of jQuery's functional utilities, which will help us implement our mini version of jQuery. So with that, I'm going to get started. I'll actually need to share my screen first. So yes, welcome back to Bitovi training. Apparently, the animation just keeps Alexis.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no.
Oh, hey, before we get started with the part 7 here, could we review the new and instance of exercise from last week?
Oh, sure, yeah. I wasn't here, I forgot about that. Where can I find it? Is it in that blog article?
Yep, same blog article. It's the JS bin right above it.
All right, let me pull that up. Okay. Oh, so do I need to implement this? So let me implement this real quick.
Yep.
So just a quick review. The new operator, that does more or less 4 things. It creates a new object, and it makes that object inherit the properties from the constructor function's prototype. And the way to do that is simply point that new object's proto at the constructor function's prototype. So that's the first 2 things I'm going to do. So I'm going to create a new object. I'm going to make my font size bigger. I know people have let us know that our fonts are never big enough. Hopefully that is big enough. Okay, so I created my new object, and then I'm going to set my object's proto. I'm going to turn off auto run. My object's proto to our constructor function's prototype. But this to me is the magic and beauty of JavaScript, is that really we already learned the dot operator, how the dot operator walks up the proto properties of objects to find other shared properties. And so that means just by setting this magic proto property, it's not really magic, it just happens to be called proto, we get, inheritance and shared properties. That's awesome to me. It's so simple. So now that I've created my object so it inherits from my constructor function's prototype object, it's time to run the constructor function with this object. So what I'm going to do is call constructor, and I'm going to run it with this function so that this is this object, and I'm then going to pass it the arguments. So this will, if I were simulate, my new operator here is simulating creating an object, pointing it at person's prototype, and then finally we're going to call this person function that was passed in here with the arguments. In this case, it's going to be passed Alexis. And then I'm just going to return my object. With that, I should hopefully get some tests to pass. Sweet. So now I am going to work on instance of. So instance of, as you can see here, it needs to walk up the object's proto chain until the prototype of our constructor is found. So here's my object. My object is like something like this O that was passed back. It's like a person instance. And here's the person constructor function. So we need to see when O's proto equals the constructor's prototype. So to do that, I can use a while loop. So I'm going to say while object dot proto, while there is a proto, I'm going to say if the object, I'm going to turn off this auto run, while object dot proto, if object proto is equal to constructor dot prototype, then I'm going to return true. And if not, I'm going to change my objects to the object proto, and then I'm going to return false. So essentially, I'm just going to keep walking up the proto chain, checking if the proto is equal to constructor.prototype. If it is, return true. Otherwise, if you eventually you don't have a proto, return false. And now everything passes. Awesome. Okay, so this week, let me get back to the presentation here. Let me do the introduction. So welcome to Bitovi's training, where our goal is to be able to build big, complex apps. I and Alexis, I'm Just Meyer, Alexis Abril are your trainers. And this week's format, we're going to have a lot of different little exercises. So I think the plan is to introduce the exercise, get everybody kind of started on it for 5, maybe 7 minutes, let people work on it, and then we'll probably show the answer today, actually, and then we'll continue on to the next exercise in question. If you are following along and aren't able to are not able to keep up with the rate at which we're kind of answering these questions, that's fine. Just pause it, do your best, ask us questions, and then hit play once you kind of have an answer or you get your questions answered. So yes, we're talking about jQuery's functional utilities. The goal, not for this talk, but for all of these talks about jQuery, are eventually building up our own jQuery library so that we can use it to build our own tabs widget. So this is the goal. I think this will take about 4 or 5 weeks of time. The tabs widget will be progressively enhanced, so it'll work on HTML like this and produce a tabs widget like this. But first, we have to build our own version of jQuery, which we can use to build the tabs widget. And to build our own version of jQuery with all its DOM manipulation, it's first helpful if we have a lot of jQuery's functional utilities. So jQuery provides a lot of low-level JavaScript utilities, like being able to loop through an array or make something that's array-like, make it into an actual array. So these are the ones that we're going to build. So the first one we're going to build is jQuery's extend function. This is just like object assign if you're going to be using ES5 or ES6. What this does is it takes a target object and a essentially, like, you could think of it as the source object, is actually I like to call the name of it. And what it does is it extends everything in, it copies all of the properties from the second argument, this object argument, into the target object. So in this case, if we were to mix in this this object here, its properties with last is Meyer, into the target object with first Justin, the result would be, so target into, so we extend object into target. By the way, this also returns the target, so result is equal to target, but result and target will both have, even though they're the same object, but they will have a first and last property when all is said and done. So this is our first exercise. Oh, let me talk about why you use $extend, or what it's useful for. So the first is, even when we're building or building our own version of jQuery, instead of writing out every single function, like having to write $1 a billion times and then having to write $.prototype for things in the prototype of our version of jQuery, instead of writing that out a bunch of times, we can kind of clean up our code and say, oh, I'm going to extend, I want to add all of these functions into $. And I want to add all of these functions into $.prototype. I like organizing my code this way because it kind of groups, oh, here's everything that's added to the prototype, and here's everything that's added to $. If you have a code editor with code folding, where it can kind of like collapse everything inside this curly brace, this makes it kind of nice to see what's where pretty easily. And another place where this is extremely common, even more common, is it's useful for extending default values. So let's say I had a move function that was going to run an animation to take an element, and it was going to move it from some position to another position in a certain amount of time. Now, I could, at every place that I'm using one of the options, do a little trick to say, if the option is defined, use that value. Otherwise, use some default value. You can see here's the default value for from is 0, for to 100, and for time is 1,000. So that kind of stinks because it's kind of hard. Your options are scattered everywhere. What you could do instead is extend your default options object with the options that was passed in, and then use that object that's been extended as the options you use everywhere else. So this way, my code can just use from, knowing that it either got the value of options, and if options.from didn't provide a value, well, it's going to fall back to using the default options objects from value. So that cleans up code quite a bit. So, okay, let's start with our first exercise. We're going to implement $extend. And again, the test looks like it's got essentially a target object and a source object, which we're calling object. We're going to copy all of the source object's values into target. We're going to make sure they're equal, and then we're going to, that target is what's returned from $extend, but we're aliasing as result. Then we'll make sure that the result actually has all the properties from the target object copied into it. Cool. So with that, we will pause for 5 minutes to let people get started and ask us any questions you have about this. The place to do this is if you're already, if you go to last week on Bitovi's blog, if you go to the prototypes training series, you go to the end of the page, you'll see next week's exercises. And then you can open up this JS bin here and work from this. So where you'll be working is you'll be filling out this $extend. And then this test should pass for you, this first one. This is me waiting 5 minutes. It's crazy to me that object assign, so you can have some random chatter here. This is exactly what object assign is supposed to do. It's crazy to me that this is not, like, this is experimental technology that hasn't been in the browser from forever. This isn't even in Chrome. It's only in Firefox. There is a nice polyfill that they provide somewhere. Where is it? There's a nice polyfill that they provide. It's so surprising because I use jQuery's $extend probably as much as I use any other function anywhere. I don't know about you, Alexis, but I use it all the time.
Pretty frequently. Pretty frequently. Congratulations. Chicago won the cup, by the way.
It did. I was...
You were there?
Something I don't really care about.
Oh.
Unfortunately, I'm just not a... I mean, I watched the finals last night, but hockey I've just never been into. Despite my whole family really being into hockey. My brother plays it. My dad plays it.
Chicago's a big hockey town, yeah. Surprising.
I've just never... I've never been able to get into hockey. I'm embarrassed into my family. Huh?
Have you been to a pro game?
Yeah. It's just not, I don't know. It's fun to watch when you're at a game, for sure, but I just find I don't know, I'm just more impressed with because I played football and I play a lot of basketball, and I guess I did, my dad would every year buy me hockey skates for Christmas because he wanted me to be a hockey player. Maybe it was because I was pushed into playing hockey, but I ended up playing a lot of football. Huh? You
rebelled against it?
Maybe, but I played a lot of football and basketball. I like playing hockey, but it's just not as, I don't know. I just find a slam dunk way cooler than a really nice move on skates. And some of the stuff they do is so impressive. It's just, I don't know. It just doesn't do it for me. Are you a big hockey fan?
I am, and our team next year's our year.
Did you?
Every year I have a serious contemplation about picking up some season tickets or something. Haven't done it yet, but I'm a big fan.
Did you watch the finals?
NBA finals last night? I did. It was exciting, but after game 5, the way game 5 ended, or the way game 4 ended, I think it was kind of, the writing was on the wall at that point.
I feel bad for LeBron. I was really annoyed at whoever the color commentator was. He was like, "Oh, this is when winners win, and really, you just can't be tired," and stuff like that. And part of me, nobody has been asked to do more with less than LeBron was.
They showed his stats. Historically, he's had the best finals ever, even better than Jerry West. Yeah,
so I was really annoyed where, like, you can't be... if you put Jordan in that situation, I don't think... Being a Bulls fan, I don't think he was coming back with a win with that. And what was with, what's his name, finally scoring at the end? That drove me nuts.
J.R. Smith?
Yeah. I was like, what are you doing nailing those threes? Where was that? Like...
Yeah. They weren't far. They were only 6 points behind at the end, too. Just need 2 more of those.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, I feel bad for LeBron. Anyways, let me maybe somehow throttle to let people know it's time to come back if they're watching this video later that we're going to start. So let me switch to me and give a double. Let's see. Oh, come on. Do you see my camera? There it goes. All right. Double thumbs up mean we're going to get started. So if you see this in the thumbnails, we're going to get started. Okay. We can probably put the time points, but we need one of those little clip, what are they called? Those little take 5 things they have in movies. You know, they use
Oh,
loop.
yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Reason.
So I'm gonna implement $extend here. And to do that, I'm gonna copy everything from object into target. So I need to go through all of the properties in object. To do that, I will go through, I'm gonna turn off auto run. I'm gonna go through every prop in object. And the shorthand of this, I could just write target. I want to set target's prop to equal the value of object prop. And then I will return the target. Now, if I go like this, $extend passes. So let's talk a little bit more about this and to talk about enumerable properties in JavaScript. So let me do this in the console because I don't want to mess things up. So let's say I create an object. Let's say I created a constructor function. And let me increase my font size. Hopefully big enough. I'll do one more. Okay, so I'm going to create a person constructor function, and it's going to take a name, and this.name is going to be set. And I'm just going to add to this person's constructor function's prototype a method called sayHi. And that's going to do absolutely nothing because that's not really important. What it does right now isn't important for our discussion. Now I'm going to create my person. Now let's say I loop through all of person's properties. What do you expect what properties do you think I'll see? Let me write the code for it. If I write this code, what do you think this is going to console log, Alexis?
I think this will console log name.
Well, let's see what it does. Okay, it does name, but it also does sayHi. So for this for loop here, what it does is not only every enumerable property on the object itself, so that's why it does name, it also walks up the proto chain and will find any enumerable property on the proto chain. Now with object define, you can actually specify that this property is not enumerable. So you could have a normal for loop work and only iterate through the properties that are enumerable just on this object. That's what really we want $extend to do. We don't want it to copy typically the enumerable properties on the proto chain of the object. So the fix to that, and what jQuery does, but the test passes regardless if you do this or not, but we like to go a little bit more in depth than our normal training for these. They use the test if the object has its own property prop and only do this assignment for those properties. So this looks like object.has own property prop. Okay, so with that, test still passes, but now we're only assigning objects property that it directly has that are enumerable to target. Any questions? Probably not out there. Okay, so there's extend. Now let's move on to our next problem. So type checking. Type checking is complex in JavaScript. So if you're checking if something is a what type of primitive it is, it's easy and it's relatively straightforward in JavaScript. Okay, so I can check if an array's length is a number type. And I can also check if something is an instance of something else. I can say, hey, is this array an instance of an array? I could do that little other ways as well. However, things can get a little hairy in JavaScript when you're using different domains, different contexts. Meaning, if I create an iframe, that iframe has its own window object, and that window object has its own copy of an array, of an object, and things like that. So if I create an iframe, and then I'm going to get the window in that iframe, which is this, and then I'm going to get its array constructor, and I'm going to call it underscore array. And if I create an instance of an underscore array, type of that array is object, so that doesn't really help me figure out if this R is an array. And our instance of array is false. So you'll actually be surprised by how often in JavaScript you're dealing with iframes, especially if you're on a site that supports ads or things like that. Or if you're in Node and you're doing like different contextual code can run in different contexts, you might be surprised by how often you're actually getting arrays of things that are not in the same window as whatever code you're running in, which is accessing this type of array. So jQuery has helpers that make it possible to test if something is an array no matter what context it came from. And the way it does this in older browsers, now in modern browsers, there's array.isArray, which will tell you if it's an array no matter what context it came in. But jQuery provides a way that works for older browsers and like IE. And what it does is it calls this clever little trick, object prototype toString. So it steals the object prototype's toString method, which by default takes the whatever object someone passed in here and returns a string that says object and then kind of the constructor name in this position. And returns a string like that. So the trick is to call this function like this and then just check if it returns a string that looks like this, and then you can know if something's a string no matter where, or you can know if something's an array no matter what context it came from. So that is jQuery's isArray. And we want to write something that will return true if we pass it something that is an array, only is an array, so not something that's array-like. The arguments object is not a true array, it's array-like, so this should return false. And even if we created an iframe and stole its array, and we created an instance of one of those, we're still going to get true back from $isArray. So this is the next exercise. We'll give people another 5 minutes to either get started with this or listen to Alexis and I talk about basketball. So you're going to do this in this $array function here. And we'll wait for another 5 minutes. Well, this says 12:37. So yeah, Alexis, I feel bad for LeBron. It's so hard. He is so good, and he just had no help.
No, he didn't. It was
But I mean, it's just amazing how well Golden State played together too. I just don't know how they just like
phenomenally.
they had so many wide open shots. They started struggling a little bit, going into the second half and a little bit out of that. But just the way they move the ball,
they were unstoppable the whole season. It's been crazy.
And because they would be double teaming
Stephen Curry.
Yeah.
Even when they do, when you see him take that shot, it takes him like a split second. There's like no setup.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw
he shoots it perfectly every time.
I saw the sports science on him, and they said he can release in 0.4 of a second, where the average for the NBA is 0.6 for a second. And it's like he's very consistent, and he shoots with a higher arc, so that it's more likely to go in.
Yeah, reduces the chance of being blocked and increases the chance of not bouncing out, or reducing chances of not bouncing out.
Yeah, it's pretty
ridiculous.
Yeah, they would double team him every time, and then he would just pass the ball off, and whoever he passed it to would pretty much have like an open look.
And they're talking about that last night. He wasn't brought into the league as a shooter. He was brought into the league as a passer, like Steve Nash or something.
Really?
Yeah. It just turns out he's a phenomenal shooter.
Who taught him to shoot like that? Or what is his practice schedule? Or is it just totally, I mean, I wonder if it's just natural, or I feel like someone had to, you have to work on that.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty awesome. I did wish they would win one more game, also because if Golden State was going to win it, I always like when teams win it at home.
Yeah.
It's
true. I didn't mind when Dallas won in Miami, though. That was all right.
Yeah, I remember that. Take that any way it comes. It's nice to see Kerr winning another one.
This is his first year coaching, isn't it?
Is it?
I think so. I'm not sure.
Well, he's got championship experience, so I'm sure that helps.
Oh yeah.
Respected player.
Did he get all 6 with Chicago, or did he get 5?
3.
He only got 3?
Maybe. I don't remember.
Oh no, he has 5. He has 2 with San Antonio.
Oh wow.
And then now he has 6. 1 as a coach.
Wow. Well, no, I mean he had 3 with the Bulls.
He had 3 with the Bulls. He had the last 3.
Yeah.
He wasn't there for the first time.
Yeah. He is the most successful 3-point shooter, right, of all time, like highest percentage.
I don't know. He had I don't know about the highest, because Larry Bird's up there too.
I think he had the highest.
Or Larry Bird might be the highest for his height, for his position, maybe. Yeah, but you might be right.
Well, because I mean, Kerr wasn't like a go-to option, so I mean, I think he's like over 45% lifetime 3-point shooter or something like that.
Yeah. This is his first or second year coaching. No, this is first. What month are we in? This is his first year coaching. Wow. There's something to put on your resume.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. All right. Let's get back to the exercise. So I'm going to implement $isArray. Oh, I'm going to first do the take. Do like.
Yeah. If we can add markers, I'll go through this video afterward and add stopping points for everybody.
Well, that'll help too, because you'll be able to see when I flip to it. Okay, so isArray. Let me turn off auto run, and I'm gonna do that same trick. I'm gonna call object prototype toString. I'm gonna get that method, but instead I'm gonna call it on obj, and I'm gonna compare it to if it's. I miss out a little bit here. I actually don't need the CHTML. Okay, I'm going to compare it to object array, and I'm just going to return that. JavaScript isArray passes. Awesome. Okay, let's do the next one. So it's useful to know if something is an array, obviously, a true array, but often you want to know if something is array-like because you're going to loop through its enumerated properties instead of its indexed properties. And although jQuery doesn't expose this isArrayLike function that you can call, it uses it internally all the time. And I can say from experience, almost every library I've worked on, you need an isArray-like helper. So this isArray-like helper returns if something has enumerated properties, meaning an array has enumerated properties. Also, the arguments object has enumerated properties, so that's array-like. If I were to get a node list from the page, so whenever you do document get elements by tag name or one of some of these type of helpers that the document provides, this doesn't return a true array. Instead, it returns a node list. So it's not a true array, but it's still got index properties. I can get the 0 div, the first div, divs.length exists. I want to return, if I pass this divs, I want isArrayLike to return true. Here's an identical example for some reason. I don't know why that's there. So what we're going to use is a strategy called duck typing to figure this out. And this is very common in dynamic languages needing to do this. What duck typing means is it's almost more like interface detection is another way you could think of it is. The idea is if something walks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, you call that bird a duck. So you check, does this thing swim? Does it quack? Well, then it's a duck. You're not breaking out a DNA test and somehow validating that this thing shares the DNA of a duck. You're just looking at superficial qualities, but you've looked at enough where you say, okay, this is a duck. So an array we can kind of duck type if something is array-like, because an array will always have a length property that is a number that is greater than or equal to 0, and it will have a zeroth property if a length is greater than 0. So we're going to check for those kind of things so that all of these cases pass. And we have a hint. Whoop. Plus thing over there. We have a hint where we want to check if object that length is a number and that we actually have, well, instead of property 0, we're going to look if length minus 1, if there's something actually in this object at that position. So we'll do this in this makeArray here.
No. Well,
wrong place. I was just looking for one with array, and
he was testing me for those watching on video. He just wanted to see if I was still watching.
You're going to do this in this isArrayLike function here, and then we'll actually end up using that in each later. So we're going to wait probably 3 or 4 minutes this time, let people get started, and then I'm going to implement it. We're running low on time. So what I might do, have the Bitovi basketball tournament when we meet in Chicago.
That would be fantastic.
So people can play that way. It'd be fun. How's your
The
game?
weekend before or the weekend after?
I don't know. We'll figure that out.
I might need to adjust a flight because I want to be there for that. But I'm flying in like the day before.
Okay. How's your game?
Oh, people aren't ready.
Yeah, no, you got that Steph Curry jump shot?
People aren't ready. And by people, I mean myself. I'm not ready.
Yeah. I mean, what I could do, I could share. Okay, Zerk is saying that he or she is lost. Zerk, if you could let us know like where you're lost, I can happily explain what we're doing. But yes, we are going pretty quick, mostly because there's so many exercises this time that we don't have a lot of time to let people just kind of play with it, figure out the answer, and then do another exercise. And we don't want to, we don't want to have a lot of little lectures because it would take, 5 weeks to get through this entire presentation if we did it that way. So for those who are struggling, I apologize, but I'm going to continue on and implement the isArrayLike now. Okay, so isArrayLike. Again, I have to check if this object has a length property. So I'm going to do that first. I'm going to write if type of object.length is equal to number. Then we've got a good start. Something is sticky. That's good. Okay, so I'm checking if the length is a number. If it is, then we're good. Otherwise, we're going to return false. Let's just return true for now. And let's see, does this let me do this? I don't know if this is possible, but that would be cool. Oh, it doesn't. That'd be cool if it did. Okay, so nothing's passing yet. Oh, we don't actually test. There's no test for this. We should actually add a test for this.
We should. It's not exposed right now, so we would have to expose it, but we should.
Expose it. Okay. Yeah, we should change that. Okay, so there is no test for this, so we can just totally ignore this. I'm just going to write it out then. So if length is a number, then okay, it's starting to look array-like. The next thing I'm going to check is if that length is 0, then we're going to return true right away. But otherwise, we're going to keep checking is if the length is greater than 0, and then we're going to have an else case where the length is less than 0. That means it's false. Oh, this is a great question. So when you use the type of operator, I could write this out a little bit differently. Type of is like new, that you don't have to you're not actually wrapping it with parentheses. But you could write type of like this, where you pass it something, and type of this returns a string that identifies what the type of whatever value was passed into type of. So it returns a string, but object.length itself is a number, presumably. If it's not a number, then we don't have something that's array-like, we're going to return false? That's a very good question. Okay, so isArrayLike. Okay, so now the goal is to figure out, does this object look like an array? Well, it has a length property that's a number. If that length is 0, well, there's no items in the array, but we're still going to return it as truthy. Yes, this does look like an array. Now, if I'm going to kind of space these out, so I always like writing like this, so it looks a little bit nicer. Yeah, exactly. It has a length. So now, if length is greater than 0, right? Let me write an example here. We could pass it an object. We could call something. We could call isArrayLike with an object that looks like length 5. Well, we wouldn't want this to pass because this is not array-like. But if we pass it something with length 5, 0 has a value A, 1 has a value B, and so forth up until 4 has a property E, then this we would actually want to be array-like. So now that I've seen that the object.length is greater than 0, I want to actually see, is there essentially length is 5, I want to see if there's a property here. If there's length minus 1, if there's a property, there's a value inside this object. Now, I don't want to write, I don't want to do something like return object and read that property, object.length minus 1. I don't want to do this. Why? What this does, by the way, is this is subtracting out, subtracting 1 from 5 to get 4, and it's going to read the value. It might return E here, and then we could just do, return. We could convert this to, this is a helper to say like negate this, so it becomes falsy if it's not there, and then we make it truthy again. Maybe for beginners here, an easier way to write this out would be to something like this. It's kind of a shorthand for doing this. You could say, okay, I'm going to check if, read the value at 4, and if that's there, if it's truthy, then I'm going to return true, otherwise return false. Why don't I want to do this, Alexis?
Oops. Let's go back to your screen. First off, we can combine those if statements, but you could head fake it with just giving it a property 4 as well.
Hmm? What do you mean? Why don't you want to just check if just read the property, and if the property is truthy, return true?
That is a good question.
Well, let me give you a hint. What if I had 0 here?
So because of how we're assuming, we're just saying if something is truthy or falsy, you could have a valid property that results to falsy, breaking this condition.
Yes. So, or if someone had an empty string here, or they put null in here, or they could even put undefined in here, which is ironic that 4 property will actually be defined as undefined. Or they put null. If they put anything in here, it's still array-like. It's just, so we wouldn't want to return false because the value is falsy. How can we determine if this for property exists regardless if the value is falsy or not. Well, I will answer my own question. And the way to do this is first I'm going to get the last property. I'm going to create a little variable, last property, and I'm just going to do that same kind of object.length -1 is the last, really the last index. I could call it last index. That'd probably make more sense. And what I'm going to say is if last index is in the object. So this in operator returns true or false if this property is in the object. So I can clean up this code here because this returns true or false anyways. I don't need to do this if return true or false. I could just do return last index in object. So now I think I have a pretty good test, which again, or pretty good isArrayLike, which of course is not actually tested. Madeline, is this, when you say regardless of what the property is this in regards to your previous question? Because it's measuring length. So no matter what the value is, it will always return a string. So if you look back at one of our earlier lectures where we talked about types, we went through a slide that listed, given every kind of type of value, what string result type of returns. You could look back at that and see kind of how type of works a little bit. So yeah, even if you so yeah, just a quick refresher on type of. Even if you put null, you're going to get a string back. This is we talked about this in one of the earlier ones. Now this is the weird exception, but everything else typically makes sense. You get what type of primitive it is. This is what type of tells you. So here is isArrayLike. Now I want to go through the ternary operator real quick, which you'll see a lot in open source code, and I want people to be able to read it. So the ternary operator is a condition. So it looks like this. It's condition. Let me turn this off. There we go. It's condition, and then it's truthy expression and falsy expression. So the ternary operator, yeah, I'll review it while I'm formatting this code to work with the ternary operator. So here, this ternary operator, essentially, you can do stuff like this. If object dot, I could do a check, like first check if the object's length property is a number. If it is a number, well, maybe I want to return true. Otherwise, I want to return false. So this is how the ternary operator works, so that you can have some expression here, and then I can run some statement that is evaluated to true or false, and then it runs the code here, or it runs the code here. So I can take this nicely nested or if-else code we're doing here, and just totally make it horrible with the ternary operator. But people do this a lot, so I want to expose people to it. So what I would do is, hey, if the type is a number, then I want to check if I could do another check, which I will do in parentheses here. I could check if object.length equals 0 or object, if I want to do that, then I'm going to do object.length is 0, then I'm going to return true. Otherwise, see how complex this is going to get. Otherwise, I'm going to do this check here. I'm going to check if this property. So I'm going to do if it's true. Otherwise, I'm going to check if object.length. Okay, I'm going to do this a little bit differently, just to clean it up. So if type of object is a number, then I'm going to check if object.length is greater than equal to 0. If it is, then I'm going to check if object.length is equal to 0, or I'm going to check if that property is in object. Otherwise, I'm going to do false. And I need a parentheses here. I'm missing some other parenthesis. So this is the craziness of the ternary operator, which you'll see people actually write out sometimes, which I always like writing things with if and else's. But what this means is, let me get my, just make sure my statements are right here. It's always a remove. This should be. Still not right. Oh no, that's the matching for this. Okay, yeah, so now that's right. Okay, so what this does is it does the same kind of if-else logic. It's first going to check if the object's length is a number. And then if it is, it's going to run this code here. If it's not, it's going to return false. This code in here is going to check if the object's length is greater than 0 or equal to 0. If it's not, it's going to return false. Otherwise, it's going to run this code in here, and this code in here is going to check if object length is equal to 0, then it's going to return true. Otherwise, it's going to check that that last property in object is in the actual object and return true or false here. So this is a way of taking all that if and else and putting it in one line. I actually don't like writing this because it's, I think, confusing to everybody. But I do want to show it. Okay. So next exercise. All right, now we're going to do one of the cooler ones. We're going to do jQuery's $each. Learn a little bit about how to provide and do functional programming. So jQuery's each, given a array, we'll loop through every item in that array and call this function, the second argument, call this function with the index of each item in the array and the item itself. So this is going to console log A is at 0, B is at 1, C is at 2. So this function gets called back 3 times. If you pass $each a object, it calls back this function for every object, for every property in that object with the property name and the value. So this would get called with prop foo value bar. Then it would get called back with prop z value tag. So this is what we're going to write, and the test looks like this. It just makes sure that if you pass an array, for index 0, you get value A, and for index 1, you get value B. And if you pass it an object, it does the same kind of check. For property foo, you get value bar, and for property z, you get property ted, and then it just stops the looping. And it makes sure that the collection itself is returned by $each. So that's the exercise. We're going to wait another minute here minute or two before we do it, and then there's two more exercises after that that we'll go through pretty quickly. So are you back in Dallas? Does that mean?
I am back in Dallas. Sorry, my audio cut out in and out of there. I'm back in Dallas for a couple days. Just got back from Calgary, which was awesome for the last 3 weeks, better part of the month in Calgary. And I leave tomorrow. I'm already packed up, ready to head across the planet.
Wow, you leave tomorrow. Awesome. So are you going anywhere? I know you said you're in London though, right?
I'm going to stop in London. One of my close friends is in Bristol, outside of London. So I'm going to go hang out with him for a couple days. And I'm not going to stay in England because I've already been around South England. So I'm going to go into Europe. Not sure where, but I got a train ticket for bordering countries. So.
What city in India are you going to be in?
Bangalore. Last time was a bit scattered. I was all over the place last time, but this time it is 5 weeks in Bangalore, India.
Do you make appearances? Like if people are in Bangalore?
I do. So if you're in Bangalore, the week of July 22nd, I will be speaking at the jQuery conference. It's a 4-day conference and a 1-day training day. I will be speaking 3 of the 4 days, I believe. Which will be pretty fun. With a lot of, there's a lot of really quality speakers. I know Dave Methven's going to be there, former jQuery core lead, Scott Gonzalez, jQuery UI, Chris Borchers from jQuery Foundation, and a whole slew of just really, really awesome people will be there. So it'll be pretty cool. If you're in Bangalore, India in July.
So someone just asked a question. Is it possible to make sure the screen?
Let me bring it up. Update the JS bin so we can see your code instead of going back to the video. Yes, if you click on the JS bin I linked, we should be able to, yes, as long as you're, let me relink that. That should be what Justin is typing into right now, if you click that link. And it looks, oh, it looks like it does look like it's a little bit behind. Let me see here.
You do a snapshot maybe. Or maybe I need to auto run.
Oh, run it once. That might update it.
Does it do it now?
We're a little bit, there it goes, yeah. That's all it was. We just need to run it.
Okay, so now let's get started on each. Make some space here so I can at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so each loops through the items in this collection and calls this function for every item in the collection. Implementing it is pretty darn easy. The first thing we need to do is determine how we want to loop through the values in this collection. Meaning that if it's an array, we want to loop through with a normal for indexing type loop, and otherwise, if it's an object, we want to use a for in loop. So that's the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check if, this off, if isArrayLike, if our collection is ArrayLike, Well, then I'm going to loop through with a normal for loop. Otherwise, I'm going to loop through my collection with a for in loop. So let's do, and then no matter what, I'm always returning the collection. For that, I should at least, okay, so this is this code breaking here. Let me change that to all obj. Okay, that's better. Okay, so now that I've got my loops, I need to call back this callback with each item in the collection. And I'll start with this. So all I'm going to do is take my callback, and I'm going to call it with the index and the collection, the item at that index. Simple enough. And I'm going to do something very similar. I'm going to call it with the property and the value at that property. Now my $eaches are passing. So this is all this is all it really takes to implement a very basic version of jQuery's each. Just test if you have something that's array-like. If you do, loop through every property in that and call the callback with that item, with the index and that item. And similarly, if it's an object, go through every property in that object and call the callback with that property and the value of that property of the on the collection. Cool. So next exercise. The next exercise is makeArray, and this converts an array-like object into a true JavaScript array. So as I said, there's these things that the DOM provides called node lists that aren't true arrays, but we could pass that to makeArray, and that would make it a real array. Similarly, if we passed an arguments object, which isn't a real array, this would return something that is a real array. So the test just checks all of those cases. So that's what we're going to build. So what it's testing is like, okay, pass it child nodes and make sure that is. Wait, this is not the right. This is not. Oh, this must have. I must have changed this code. Oh wait, never mind. It's well. There should be a maker. Is not array. makeArray. Oh, never mind. This is a good test. So it's making sure that child nodes is in fact not an array, and then it's making child nodes into an array, and then testing that it is an array. And then it's going through, making sure the lengths of the array is right, so every item was copied into the array. So it's making sure that the length of the new array, it matches the child node's length, and that every item in the made array is equal to the original array-like object. So I'm going to just start with this because we are out of time. makeArray is really easy, but what I'm going to do is use the power of each to make it help a little bit easier. So I'm going to make an array that we're going to put everything into. And what I'm going to do is use $each to loop through. Oh, this is going to be the, I'm going to call it real array. This is going to be the source array. I'm going to loop through the source array with $each. And for every item in that array, I'm just going to push that into real array. And at the end of this, I'm just going to return real array. My makeArray works. So all this is doing is just going through every property or every value in R and pushing it into a real array and returning that real array. So hopefully that makes sense. And now we will move on to the last one, proxy, which is probably the coolest example. So I think we mentioned this problem in previous talks. The problem that this is a very mutable, the keyword this, is a very mutable concept in JavaScript, where let's say I have my dog, it has a name property and a speak, and what I want to do is be able to call dog speak after a certain timeout. Or sorry, I want to pass dog speak to set timeout, meaning, let me copy this code. Explain the problem first. So I have my dog, and it has its speak function. What I want to be able to do is to do something like this: set timeout dog.speak. Well, this doesn't work, and hopefully people were. Well, the reason was we discussed this in the closures talk. The reason is because inside set timeout, it's just calling this function with the normal call operator. So this is going to be the window. So you can't do this very easily in JavaScript. Pass that timeout. That's the function.
Another way to illustrate that to match our previous slides would be something like var speak equals dog.speak, and then trying to invoke that function.
Yeah. Set timeout is essentially doing, if you just did something like this and calling speak. You can't call speak and have this be what you want if you call it like this, because this will be the window. Instead, you always have to call it dog.speak. Now what the proxy function does is it lets you $.proxy, you pass it your function, and then you pass it what you want this to be when that function is called. And with this, then you could actually call speak, and it would correctly write out Fido says wolf. Similarly, I could pass this speak function to set timeout, and this speak function would be called correctly as well. What this actually does is it creates a new speak function that will call this speak function correctly. That's what our little example is trying to show. We can create a speak proxy function and then pass this to set timeout. And if we were to do that and then run this code, let's run here, after a second, we would see Fido says wolf. So this is what we want to get working. We want to be able to create this proxy function, pass it on a function, and pass it what this should be when this source function gets called. And we can just call the function. And it also forwards any arguments. So when we call speak proxy, it's actually going to take any arguments here and make sure that those call this speak function with the same arguments. So let's see. So pause now if you don't want to see the answer, and otherwise I'm going to show the answer. This code is actually surprisingly simple. I'm just going to, yes, this is the same as the bind function Dima716 asked. Dima716 asked, is this the same as the bind function? Yes, it is. I will explain that a little bit better once I show the answer. So to do this, I'm going to create a function. And this is the function that I want returned. And this function needs to call this source function with this, with context as this. If you remember from our how this works slide, we can do that. We can control what a function is called, what this is, by passing it, by using the apply method and passing in what we want this to be. And then I want the arguments passed here to actually be the arguments that this function is called with. I'm going to write out arguments. And then all of our tests pass. So that's surprisingly simple. So yes, there is now in modern browsers, they support a .bind directly on functions, a bind method. So what that means is here, instead of having to call $proxy and passing it the function and the dog to create the speak variable, I could instead write it this way, dog.speak. Just like functions have an apply and a call method, now they have a bind method that I can specify what I want this to be. And this returns a new function that, when called, calls this original function with this as dog. So if you're dealing with modern browsers, you can use this. But I still really like to teach $proxy because I like to, it just puts together a lot of, I don't know, in such a small piece of code, I think it's well, it discusses the problem of this, which I think is really important for people to understand. Like, you can't get enough explanation of how this works in JavaScript. It's so important. And this provides a solution in such a small amount of piece of code, and it kind of shows how you can take one function and create another function that kind of wraps it, that we'll call the source function with different things. This kind of functional programming in a very small example. I think it's a very useful demo here. So that is it. If you are going through these and have questions, Alexis and I will be available next week to answer any questions you have about the code that we wrote here. And Alexis will put up the slides and the example code. So next week, what are we talking about next week, Alexis? Is this actually starting to build jQuery?
We are starting to build jQuery. Next week, we will be talking about how to find elements in the DOM. So the next maybe 3 weeks, I think, are going to be manipulating the DOM, how jQuery searches the DOM. Big way we kind of teach things at Bitovi is we do this inception level kind of, we have a nice little inception dream diagram where we start really, really high. And at this point, we've broken down JavaScript all the way to where we're rebuilding JavaScript's core functionality, but we're starting to come back up into how we build jQuery. And eventually we'll end up with how do we use jQuery and how do we build complex components and things. So next week is our first kind of intro to finding elements in the DOM, and then we'll be traversing elements in the DOM afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, our approach takes a while, but I think in the end it's the best way to learn. You know, we've done it a lot of times with a lot of people. But it takes a while till you feel like, hey, I'm actually able to build an application, but you understand everything below the application level stuff, which is really important. Cool, awesome. Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next week, we'll see you guys later.